All right, let's dive in. We've got a really fascinating and frankly pretty troubling story for you today. It's all about how one of the most brilliant scientific ideas ever got twisted into something ugly, something used to justify empire, war, even racism. So, how did that happen? Let's follow the breadcrumbs. So, yeah, that's the big question we're unpacking. How on earth did a scientific theory, one that's fundamentally about nature, about finches and turtles on a remote island, get so warped that it was used to justify human empires? It's a heck of a journey, from the Galapagos all the way to the centers of power in Europe. Okay, so to really get how Darwin's big idea got so mangled, we have to first get a picture of the world it was born into. See, before Darwin came along, there was really only one main explanation for everything. For centuries, the go-to answer was something called special creation. The idea was pretty straightforward. God created every single living thing just as it is in one fell swoop. It was a perfect, neat, theological explanation. But then, Darwin comes along and throws a wrench in the whole thing. He proposed something totally different, not based on faith, but on evidence. He said life isn't fixed at all. It's constantly changing. It's evolving, pushed along by this incredible process of adaptation. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some random thought he had. No way. This theory was the result of years and years of painstaking work. He sailed around the world on the HMS Beagle, collecting fossils, studying birds and tortoises, noticing these tiny variations from one island to the next. He was basically putting together a giant puzzle, piece by piece, all based on what he could see and touch. And all of that work went into his landmark book on the origin of species. So what was the engine driving all this change? He called it natural selection. And it's actually a pretty simple idea when you break it down, but it's so powerful. It just means that in any environment, some individuals are going to have traits that give them a tiny advantage, right? Maybe it's slightly better camouflage or a beak that's just a little bit stronger. Those individuals are more likely to live long enough to have kids and pass those helpful traits on. The key thing to lock in here is that it's all about adapting to the natural environment. That part's going to be really important in a minute. And right here, this is where the story takes a really sharp and honestly a pretty dark turn. Because remember, Darwin was talking about biology, about plants, animals, birds. But some people saw his theory and thought, what if we applied this idea to people, to societies, to who gets to be in charge? And the main guy behind this was a British philosopher named Herbert Spencer. You've probably heard the phrase survival of the fittest, right? Well, that was him, not Darwin. Spencer is the one who took Darwin's purely biological idea and just pasted it right onto human society. He basically argued that the rich were rich and the powerful were powerful because they were naturally more fit. He saw it as a law of nature, just like gravity. And that's how we get this brand new ideology, social Darwinism. And this is the absolute key takeaway. The two things are not the same. Natural selection is a scientific theory about how animals and plants adapt to their surroundings. Social Darwinism, on the other hand, is a political tool. It hijacks the language of science to make it seem like social inequality, the rich being on top of the poor, or one country dominating another, is not only natural, but it's inevitable, maybe even a good thing. And believe me, this wasn't just some stuffy debate happening in university classrooms. This idea became a super powerful excuse, a sort of scientific permission slip for people to wield power in some pretty brutal ways all over the world. And what's really wild is seeing how this one core idea got twisted to fit whatever a country needed it to. So you look at Britain, right? They're at the peak of their industrial empire, and suddenly, Spencer's ideas are perfect for justifying why they should rule over other nations. It's just nature's way. But then you look over at a rising Germany, and you see thinkers like Houston Stewart Chamberlain taking it to a whole new, terrifying level. He started arguing that Germans were a biologically superior master race, and that poison, that specific idea, would later become a huge part of Nazi ideology. So, as you can probably guess, the fallout from this was, it was catastrophic. It basically gave a green light, and a fake scientific one at that, for all sorts of aggression and oppression on a global scale. You can really boil the impact down to three major devastating things. First, imperialism. It gave European powers a scientific reason for the scramble for Africa. They were these strong nations, so they had a right to take over the weak ones. Second, It pumped up aggressive nationalism. Suddenly, war wasn't just about politics. It was a biological contest to see which nation was the fittest. And third, it laid the groundwork for institutionalized racism. It created these fake, rigid ladders of superior and inferior races, which were then used to justify all kinds of horrible persecution. So when you step back and look at the big picture, you can draw a straight, horrifying line. This total corruption of Darwin's science built a bridge, really, from the scientific discoveries of the 19th century straight to the massive bloody conflicts of the 20th. It really was the scientific excuse that a lot of people in power were looking for. Which brings us to a really important question, one that's just as real today as it was back then. It makes you think, when does a powerful idea stop being a tool for understanding and start being a weapon? It's a pretty stark reminder that the best ideas can be twisted for the worst reasons, and that learning to spot the difference between real science and an ideology that's just wearing a lab coat, well, that might be one of the most important skills we can have. Thanks for sticking with us.